Sir David, it's a pleasure to see you in the chair, and I'm glad to be able to sum up for the SNP this morning. And I do pay credit to the honourable members who've brought this debate, the honourable member for St Austell and Newquay, and the honourable members for Congleton and St Ives. And their commitment to this is very honourable, but the reality of this and the reality of the family test is that it is barely worth the paper that it's written on. And the answers that the honourable member from Congleton received from all the different parties really do indicate that. The government says it's not designed to be a tick box exercise, Sir David, but in reality it's not really any kind of an exercise at all, because it's perfectly clear that the government is not applying it to the policies it's coming up with, either in theory or in practice. And that is absolutely the case in the cases I deal with in my constituencies. And I'd refer as well to comments by the former Secretary of State, the honourable member for Chingford and Wood Green, who said, standing almost just there on the 30th of January last year, on a debate in marriage and government policy, and the honourable members were probably here at that point as well. And he said, in that debate, he says, "I was nominated to construct the family test against which everything was going to be measured. When I finally left government of my own volition, I had at no stage had I managed to get agreement from any of the key players about what it would consist of. While there was a principle, which was that the Prime Minister wanted a test that all decisions would be set against, the reality was that the Treasury in particular was not keen on any of it. I urged the Minister to press for a definition of the family test by which all effects of policy decisions could be looked at to see whether they would damage the family or make things more difficult. That would make logical sense." That was last year, Sir David, and nothing has changed, because it's perfectly clear to me that while this policy might exist in some form somewhere, the application of it is absolutely non-existent. It's utter escapism, and the policy is full of contradictions. So I would like to start, Sir David, with an issue that I have campaigned on quite a lot, and that is the issues around child poverty and austerity. And I would like to start with the two-child policy. Now, the two-child policy, Sir David, has absolutely no relevance to the family test at all, because I know that because I asked government ministers about it at the time when they were talking about bringing it in. I have raised the two-child policy, I think, around 60 times at least in this place, in the chamber, and I've asked questions and I've campaigned on it. There is no relevance of the family test to the two-child policy, because it is completely destructive to families for many different reasons, not least because it will move children into poverty and make it far more difficult for those families to cope and to survive. It's been condemned by Sir Philip Alston recently in the UN report. It was condemned by CEDAW just this week, who recommend the scrapping of the two-child policy. And I met with a range of organisations on Monday this week, including the Church of England, the Board of Deputies of British Jews, representatives of Scottish churches, CPAG, Turn to Us, Women's Aid, Rape Crisis, both from Scotland, and I've heard from Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland equivalents of all those organisations, from Refuge, and the BME and the RCN also condemn this policy, Sir David, because they know that it's damaging to families, and it meets no aspect of the family test. It means that families will be at least £2,780 worse off per year, and it makes it far more difficult for those families to survive. And the first element of the family test says, what kinds of impact might the policy have on family formation? Well, Sir David, this family is deliberately to encourage families to have fewer children. That is the stated purpose and aim of this policy. That is inimical to family formation. It also discriminates against families who wish to come together from two separate previous relationships. It has an impact on blended families, because if you have two children from one family and you want to marry and then have a third child perhaps, or another child comes from another family, families lose out as a result of that. It does not meet this aspect of the test. What kinds of impacts will the policy have on families going key transitions, such as becoming parents, getting married, fostering or adopting, bereavement, redundancy, new caring responsibilities, or the onset of long-term health conditions? Well, Sir David, the UK government has been taken to court to add an element to this. They lost in court because they hadn't taken into account the impact of this on people who have caring responsibilities, because a family who had a woman who had taken on the caring responsibilities for her two siblings lost out when she had a child of her own. The government went to court and they lost, Sir David, because it's unfair. It also has an impact on bereavement as well, because you may have had 3 children, Sir David, and everything was fine in your family. Everything was okay. You could well afford the children that you had, because that's often what the Tories say, that you should only have the children you could afford. But you may have had the children you could have afforded. Things could have been fine. And then all of a sudden, a partner dies. You have to claim universal credit, you have to reduce your hours in work. This does not meet the aspect for the two-child policy because this deliberately punishes people who end up in those circumstances that they could not reasonably have predicted. What impacts will this policy have on all families' ability to play a full role in family life, including with respect to parenting and other caring responsibilities? Well, again, Sir David, this policy means that if you have 3 children and your circumstances change, you're going to struggle to play a full role in family life, Sir David, because you're not going to have enough money coming in. Or parents will have to try and work longer hours with the effect of having less time with their children, with the impact, perhaps, as the Honourable Member for Congleton suggested, that people will look to other sources of support, such as gangs. So it has a huge impact on members' ability to play a full role in family life, not least because of the poverty aspect. How does the policy impact families before, during and after couple separation? Well, it has an impact on this as well, Sir David, because it creates a perverse disincentive. A perverse incentive where if you have 3 children, actually you will get more money if you separate your family. If you become a family with 2 children over there and a family with 2 children over there with 2 single parents, that is the incentive of the two-child policy, and this government cannot deny that that is the case. How does the policy impact those families most at risk of deterioration of relationship quality and breakdown? Again, that's just what I've said. It incentivises those families to stay apart rather than stay together. And the government has not recognised this through any part of the policy. The family also has a disproportionate impact, and the members opposite would know this well. This is a disproportionate impact of people of religious faith who will not use contraception and who do not believe in abortion. Because if you have 4 children and you become affected by this policy, you lose out. That disproportionately affects people of religious faith. It disproportionately affects the Jewish community who have spoken out against this policy, and the Church of England have also spoken out, and it disproportionately affects those of Muslim faith also. That is out and out despicable. And the government does not accept that this is the case, but it is absolutely true. And the two-child policy further will have a really chilling effect. It will impact on thousands and thousands of families across this country who will lose out on their entitlement and lose out on their ability to support their family, which is absolutely ridiculous. To move on to the issues around the Home Office that families mentioned, well, I have many cases in my constituency of people who are affected by the Home Office and the impact of government policy on how people can live their lives. We have people who cannot afford, because of the threshold, the £18,600 threshold before they can bring a spouse to come here. People who desperately want their partner to come here, desperately want to be reunited with their children, but because of an arbitrary figure, and I had constituents who lost out by a couple of pounds on this figure, we're not allowed to bring family members to the country. Now, what impact does that have on family life? Where does that fit with a family test? And that minimum income threshold as well means that there is huge pressure on the earners in the family. And I've got a constituent who's working 2 jobs. He works as a bank clerk, as a mortgage advisor, and he also works at night stacking shelves in a supermarket so that he can bring his family here. That is having a huge impact on his mental health, on his well-being, because he has to work all the hours he can to get his family in, and the Home Office are still making that incredibly difficult for him. There's an impact as well on the government policy of no recourse to public funds. Now, Sir David, that's people who have come to the country, been granted their status, and the government have decided that they are not entitled to any working age benefits at all. And I've got a constituent who is case number 3 on my books, Sir David. Case number 3 from when I was elected in 2015. She still has no recourse to public funds. She is almost destitute. She has been coming to my office looking for support with school uniforms every year, looking for support with Christmas presents for her children, Sir David, because she cannot afford that, despite the fact she is working. She is working all the hours that she can, but under this government's cruel policies to no recourse to public funds, she cannot get enough to live on. And it is heartbreaking. I had her and her daughter in my office at Christmas time, and her daughter came back into my office after she and her mum had left and said, "Why have we not got any money? Alison, why have we not got any money?" And I can't answer that question. It's for the Minister to answer why he wants to put families in this position where their children are heartbroken and in poverty and being judged by their friends and not having any kind of a life because of the government's cruel policies. There is also an impact on Home Office policies, such as the hostile environment, which make it very, very difficult for people to carry on family lives. There's an impact on things like the policies which prevent people from continuing to stay in this country And I'll give you an example of this as well, because I had a number of people at my surgeries one Friday, and the first couple came to see me. And the husband was from one country, the wife was a British citizen. And they had been told by the Home Office that they both had to go and leave to the country where one of the couple had been from, because they had no family ties here. They didn't have any children, so they could just go and live there, and that would be just as easy for them as staying in the UK, and there would be no problems there. And they said to me, Alison, would it make any difference if we had children? Would we be able to stay if we had children in this country? And I said, well, probably not. This is just the way the Home Office does things, and I offer them support. The next couple that came in straight after them, they had a baby. Their baby was quite young, I think their baby and a toddler, and they said they were in much the same circumstances. They'd been told by the Home Office that they could go back to some other country to live, and it wouldn't make any difference because their children were young, and they wouldn't know any better. And they said, what can we do here? I mean, we've got children, we've got family ties here, what can we do? The Home Office computer still says no. And this is a huge insult to those people who want to come here, who do this the honour of coming to live here and choosing to live in this country. And we tell them, no, off you go and contribute to some other country because we don't want you here. It is despicable and is against everything that the family test ought to stand for. It's not worth the paper it's not written on. And I'm not surprised that the Honourable Member for Congleton says that it took the Home Office 6 months to reply, because in practice, in many of my cases, it takes them much longer than that. She's lucky to get a response in 6 months, because the Home Office really don't care how they treat people. I had a family with 3 children who were due to report to Brand Street as part of their obligations under the Home Office's hostile environment. And they had to take their child, one child out of nursery, the other 2 children out of school to go and report at the Home Office, not knowing if they would get to go back to school or nursery afterwards, not knowing if they would be removed and sent to Dingavel when they went. What kind of family test is that? What kind of impact does that have on family life? The stress in the parents, the stress in the children, having the indignity of being forced to go and report to Brand Street and not knowing if they would go home afterwards. It's utterly despicable. And I talked about the impact of no recourse to public funds and people living on low wages. And I would like to talk at this point about the pretendy living wage that the government has. It is not enough for the government to live on. It is not enough for people to live on, and the government knows that. And the impact of that has an impact on family life as well. Because if you're working away and you don't have enough to live on, then you're going to struggle to maintain a family life. You're going to struggle to do all the things that we would like to do with our families, to take our children out, to go out to places and to pay for things like school trips or books or anything else that you want to do to have a better family life. And it is worse for those families under 25 because they're not even entitled to the Chancellor's pretendy living wage. And there is a growing gap for those under the age of 25 who are entitled to much, much less, but may have exactly the same obligations. They may have children to support. They may have different lives to lead. They don't get a discount in their rent, certainly for being under the age of 25. And the government needs to recognise that and make sure that a fair day's work earns you a fair day's pay, which is not the case in this country. And there's no protection either under the family test for families when people reach old age. And I would like to refer to the WASPy women in this who have worked their whole life, have paid in, have sacrificed their own time with their own families, only to find their retirement cruelly stolen away from them. And that has an impact on family as well, because they were often told, they were often expecting to look after their children, their grandchildren at that point, and they now can't do that. They have to keep working. The mums have to keep working as well to pay for the nursery fees, and that has a hugely detrimental impact to family life. And I want to finally, Sir David, talk about Brexit, because the Honourable Member for Congleton mentioned it very briefly in all of this, and that will have a hugely detrimental impact on family life. Because those people who have come and chosen to live here and chosen to be in this country are now finding themselves feeling as though they have very little option. And some of them are leaving the place that they called home because they no longer feel welcome. They are giving up the links that they've made here, the families that they've made here. They're disrupting their family life. And there's probably nothing that covers that in the family test right here, but it does have a real impact on families right across these islands. And it is with huge sadness that this government is pursuing this. And it will then mean that those EU nationals in this country will be forced into the same kind of hostile environment that the Home Office applies to everybody else, and the problems that I've clearly outlined with that too. And in Scotland, we are doing our best in all of this, Sir David. We are trying to provide things like baby boxes, like grants for families to help support them in those early years. We are doing our very best to ensure that they have the best place in the world to grow up. But we are hampered by the policies of this Tory government. We are hampered by the decisions of Westminster. And I firmly believe, Sir David, that if we were an independent country, we would make that vision of Scotland being the best place in the world to grow up true for everybody, and proper family tests would be applied to all of our policies, not something that's barely worth the paper that it's written on.
Yeah.